This is the Rural Homelessness Podcast, where we discuss the important issues around rural homelessness, hear from those affected by it, and offer some solutions. Brought to you by the award-winning homelessness charity, the Ferry Project. Welcome to the Rural Homelessness Podcast. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Rural Homelessness Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. I am your host, Matt McChlery, and joining me today is CEO of the Ferry Project, Mr. Keith Smith. Hello, Keith. Welcome.
Hiya, Matt. Thanks for inviting me back again. It's a pleasure, as always, to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. And today we are starting off our new year by something that we did last year. I can't believe it was that long ago now, but part of what we were doing is we traveled around a little bit in our region and we spoke to people about their perceptions and their views of homelessness. So today we're going to be hearing a whole range of other voices as well on the show, as you can hear what people thought to some of the questions that we asked them. Now, the first question we asked, Keith, was, what does home mean to you? And here is some of what they said.
Home to me means security, safety and family.
Somewhere safe, comfortable, that I can relax, be myself, and escape from the challenges of the world outside your front door.
Family. A roof over my head, safety, and community.
Where my husband is, where family is, yeah.
A safe place that you can go back to and know that you're safe, secure, and welcome.
Family, warmth, food on a table, and just happiness, really. Just think back to those memories as a child. Home will always be that house where my parents are, and that's what it means to me.
For me, home is somewhere that I consider a safe place, somewhere I can relax and escape the stresses of life. But not everyone can be happy and have a safe home environment, especially if they live with someone who's causing them not to feel safe. And it's one of the most common reasons why we have young runaways and they choose to become homeless because they don't feel safe at home. And unfortunately, that's just like jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire.
So there are some of the responses we had as we went around asking people the question, what does home mean to you? So Keith, on a personal level, what does home mean to you?
Well, I can only echo lots of what I've heard there. So I'm one of four boys. I was brought up with my mum and dad, and I was one of four boys. Obviously, home is that image of, as they said, safe place where you're secure and you have fun and you've got all the memories and you know that you're accepted there. It's a place that you're accepted. And I'm now a granddad and I've got 5 kids, and we obviously had a large home as well. We hope to provide that for our children. And indeed for our grandchildren now, a place where they feel safe and they can be accepted for who they are, not for what the world or anybody else wants them to be. So yeah, that's what it means on a personal level. I think, yeah, the place where you're accepted is a key.
And of course, we are speaking about people who are homeless, so people who are without a home. So does it necessarily mean to say that everything that people have said there, what home means to them, has that all been completely lost by the people you come across in your work or in the support services that you provide? Or, What kind of picture is it?
Absolutely. Well, actually, I know it sounds a bit surprising maybe, but the truth is, yes, that is what they've lost. We talked to our staff team to help them to try and understand what being homeless is like, because if you haven't experienced it, and let me just say, I did experience a form of homelessness myself. My wife and I had to move in with people we didn't know. They very generously offered us a bedroom and their lounge to use. We were buying a house and it all fell through, and for a period of about 6-8 weeks, we were living at their generosity, really. We were staying in their house. Anna, my wife, was at that time 7 months pregnant. The whole thing felt very insecure. Now, we were actually fortunate that we were able to move in with this couple who were prepared to allow us to stay with them. We just moved into a new town. The house we were purchasing fell through, and they were very generous to us. But so I've experienced it at a very low level. But what we say to our staff team is, for the person to be homeless, whether whether everybody around them likes it or not, it means that every person they've said, "Can I stay with you?" has turned them down. They've been rejected by everybody they know. So that feeling of security and safety and the place where people accept you has totally gone. And it is a major trauma. It's a major trauma for anyone. If you've ever experienced that, that is a major shock to the system. And so much of the work that we do initially with people is to provide them with two things: a space to actually come to terms with what just happened, and a space where they can feel safe. Because if you haven't got safety, you've got nothing. So you need to feel safe.
That's really insightful. Thank you. Now, the second question we asked people was their perceptions of homelessness. So we asked, when thinking of a homeless person, what is the first thing that comes to mind? And these are some of their responses.
Somebody who has nowhere to go and no one to turn to.
Loneliness.
How harsh it must be in terms of living conditions, most especially in winter, given the seasons that we have in this country, but just how tough it is for individuals and people in that position.
That's a tough question. Often somebody that's hit a difficult patch in their life and they need help and they need support.
Yeah. Unsafe, needing support and companionship.
It's just really sad being on your own and not having a safe place to go and just feeling vulnerable all the time.
Someone sleeping rough.
They're cold, they're alone, and they're in a really difficult spot. Just really isolating, I guess, is a really good word for it. Yeah, and yeah, just scary, I guess.
I used to think, as most people do, that homeless people are just all alcoholics and drug addicts. And unfortunately, that stigma is attached to these very vulnerable people. And as someone who's been homeless and someone who does not drink alcohol and doesn't take drugs, and my perception has obviously changed. I only see very vulnerable people who need help and support. I will always offer to help a homeless person in buying them a bottle of water, getting them some food, and have a conversation with them. Because when you're homeless, you can feel very invisible to the outside world and very cut off.
So there are some of the responses we had to our question, when thinking of a homeless person, what is the first thing that comes to mind? So having listened to that, Keith, what would you say? Would you agree with some of those things? Some of that kind of reflected some of the, I guess, assumptions or stereotypes, but then there was quite a lot of thoughtfulness in there as well, where people were going beyond the sort of facade that you sometimes get, that sort of initial image of sort of rough sleeper, drug addict type thing, and actually thinking about the person and their circumstance. From your experience, what can you say about that?
Well, if you listen to the people speaking, the one who actually I think was most insightful was the person who'd actually experienced homelessness, and he used the word invisible. Now, my experience, both, so I've never been street homeless, so I have no personal experience. All I can share with you is what people have told me and what I've seen from individuals. So that feeling of being invisible, that feeling that nobody cares, is probably one of the most profound things that impacts the homeless people that we deal with. So as I said, when you become homeless, that one of the key points is that everybody you know, so all the people you actually know, have rejected you. Otherwise, you'd be able to stay with them. So even if there was legitimate reasons why you couldn't stay with them, they've still said no. So you've been rejected. You then go into a situation like being on the street, and actually people start to avoid you, and they avoid eye contact. They might cross the road, and they will do different bits and pieces. And as a result of that, the normal assumption where you can go and ask people for help starts to disappear. So even the people you know reject you. The people you don't know reject you. So you are literally now put into almost a strange isolation within a community, which must be incredibly difficult to deal with. That's why we need to give this, why we give this chance for decompression. We need people to actually be able to express those feelings and express what that was like, to be sad about it, to share some of that, and to talk about it, and so on. There is some clear evidence. There was a campaign called No Second Night Out, and what the campaign was based on was research was done, and what they said was that when they were talking to homeless people and people with, who lived through this, they said that the person on the first night when they sleep rough, that has a significant impact. But if you can get to those individuals and you can support them and you can give them a place to stay, that impact is emotional, but it hasn't affected their behaviour too much. By the end of the second night out, they've already started to change their behaviour because they have to go into a defence situation where they are suspicious of everybody and they have to be careful about being attacked or people abusing them or doing things to them, stealing things from them, people mistreating them. And the impact of everybody rejecting, not accepting help, has a psychological impact, and it changes the way that people think and the way that people behave. So the government accepted this and created this campaign called No Second Night Out. And indeed, lots of us as charities now try to do everything we can to prevent somebody sleeping rough more than one night if that's what they have to do, because the change is significant and it takes a while to recover from that change. And the longer you sleep out, the more that change becomes embedded. There was if you go on YouTube, there's an interesting video you can find, and I'm sorry I can't remember its name, but they got a little girl of about 9, and they dressed her up in really tatty clothes and without shoes and stuck her on the streets of London. And this little girl, they made her dirty, and this little girl went up to people in the streets and started asking for help. And in that situation, people just pushed past her, ignored her, walked away, did things, and they didn't give her. Nobody stopped and helped her. They got the same girl and they washed her up and put her in a pretty frock, and gave her nice shoes and did her hair and so on. And that girl then went up to people again in the same place and said, "Oh, please, can you help me? I've lost my parents," or whatever. And in every case, people stopped and supported her. And it just shows just how people assume all sorts of things from appearance. So if you've been sleeping rough a couple of days and you're starting to look dirty and disheveled, people start to assume things about you and so on. So it's complicated. It's a very complicated thing, but the impact on the individual is really profound. And that invisibility is something that we as a charity do something about. So Ferry Project, we deliberately bought a property in Wisbech, which is a grade 2 star listed building. It was built, its main building was built in 1730. Okay. And it's a beautiful building, Georgian and all the rest of it. And it's got all the features. And part of the reason for doing that was we wanted to send out a message to the homeless people locally to us that, as the advert puts it, you are worth it. So we deliberately bought this building so that homeless people coming to our site did not feel they were being put in the worst accommodation left and the only place that could be got. But actually they were coming to one of the best buildings in the town. One of the most beautiful, one of the best ones. And for those who don't know, Wisbech was the birthplace of Octavia Hill, who started the social housing movement. And she believed that every person deserved a place to live, deserved opportunity, and deserved beauty. And so because we agree with that, we called our building Octavia View, which is the, Octavia's view of life, Octavia's view of supporting people. Because those things are just so key, so key. A homeless person can be invisible, totally invisible. And what we want to say is, you're not invisible with us. You're not invisible with us. We see you.
I must say that's something that is echoed across other homelessness charities. I'm just thinking of a national charity called Crisis. I don't know if you know, but they've just recently teamed up with Mr. Men and Little Miss. Yeah. And they've just started a whole range of products and awareness raising. And they've created 2 new characters for Mr. Men and Little Miss called Little Miss Invisible and Mr. Invisible. And these characters are homeless, and just highlighting that whole, what you've been saying about this invisibility that happens as a result. Yeah, there you go. We asked another question because, of course, this is the Rural Homelessness Podcast, and we are based in Wisbech, and the Ferry Project provides homelessness services and support for people in the Fenland area of England. And so we asked where people thought the biggest problem of homelessness was, and we gave them the choice between Wisbech, which is where the Ferry Project is located, and a nearby city where we know that there is a homelessness problem. Well, there's homelessness problems all over the place, let's be honest. But we compared with Cambridge, and we asked, where did they think was the greater homelessness problem, in Wisbech or in Cambridge? And this is what they said.
Cambridge.
I think Wisbech.
There's probably a homeless problem in both, but I just purely based on the sort of population of both, I kind of think maybe Cambridge has a slightly higher concentration, but I suspect proportionally then they both have similar issues.
I would have said Cambridge, but now Wisbech is on the list, possibly Wisbech. Knowing a little bit about rural homelessness, I would say Wisbech.
I guess it depends what you mean by homeless, because some people think of people who are on the streets and some people think of families who... Yeah, so I don't know. It could go either way, that one. I really don't know.
Sounds all. I would think Wisbech, but it depends on the numbers. I can see sometimes maybe it's Cambridge, but I would think probably Wisbech.
Cambridge, just as it being a city, just, maybe it's an attraction to people to go there. There's more happening there. But yeah, I'm not sure. It could be neck and neck, but I'll go with Cambridge on that one.
This is a difficult question for me to answer, as I don't really know the areas very well. I'm originally from London, and I know that it's such a huge problem in London and in most cities. Not much is being done to help these people. Mostly they are swept under the carpet, moved on by the police. We have, with charities like the Salvation Army and the Ferry Project, who saved my life, literally do a fantastic job. But the government are not doing nearly enough to help these and support the homeless people in this country.
So there are some thoughts that we gathered from the people we spoke to about that. So Keith, what do you think? You work in Wisbech, but I'm sure you're also familiar with the homelessness situation in neighbouring cities such as Cambridge. How do the statistics compare?
Okay, so if we're looking purely at numbers of people who are homeless in the communities, then Cambridge is higher. But that's because their population is so much higher. So Cambridge's population is around 100,000 plus. Wisbech is just 30,000 plus. Now, Ferry Project supports 300 individuals a year in the Wisbech area who are homeless or just on the verge of becoming homeless. And that does not include all the people that the local authority has a legal responsibility to deal with. And we only deal mostly with single people. So on top of all our figures are those figures from local government and indeed from families as well. So if we actually take that, we're looking at over 2% of the adult population of Wisbech being homeless every single year. Now, if we were to put that into Cambridge, what we'd be looking at then is nearly 2,000 people homeless a year. Well, these figures are starting to get very large. And although Cambridge literally has hundreds of homeless people, 2,000 is perhaps beyond where even they are. And these are the figures of the people we actually know, not just people who might be, sofa surfing or whatever. So actually, people don't realise that percentage-wise, homelessness is very high in rural communities. And Wisbech, because of its economy, is one of the highest in the country, percentage-wise. So, I think it depends how you take the figures. Raw figures, pure numbers, Cambridge. Percentage-wise, I think actually Wisbech is higher.
Yeah, and that follows on to the next question that we asked everybody, which was, do you think that there is a homelessness problem in the countryside? This is what they said.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I don't think it's noted as much or governed as much, but I do think there is, yeah.
Yeah, I do. I think it's not just in urban areas, but clearly in rural parts too, in small towns and settlements, you still have substantive issues there. People struggling to buy homes, rent homes, and from what I can see, it's not just the big towns and cities; it's elsewhere too.
100%. Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I reckon it can happen to anybody. Perhaps more in the town, but also in the countryside. Yeah.
I wouldn't have, but yes, I do now.
I don't think so, mainly because I haven't seen it, haven't witnessed it myself. But just because the countryside doesn't mean it's not happening.
I know that there is a lot of homeless people who choose to stay in the countryside as they may feel safer than staying on the streets, but they are also very difficult to spot compared with obviously people sleeping rough on the streets, because they are pretty much visible. But the homeless people in the countryside, they probably choose to go there because they want to be invisible. So yeah, that's a big issue.
There are some responses about you think there is a problem of homelessness in the countryside. Just a few things to pick out there. One person said that they didn't think there was a problem because they couldn't see it. And then another person saying that, well, he's not surprised that you don't see it because it's very much of a hidden thing, especially in rural areas. Would you agree with this in your experience?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. So I've done a straw poll, and indeed there's been quite a bit of work done. If you actually ask people on the whole, can you tell me, if you close your eyes and imagine a homeless person, where do you see them? And nearly everybody says outside a shop,
on a bench,
by a bus stop, sat on the pavement,
outside Starbucks.
Yeah, all these types of things. None of them actually go, I see them in the middle of a field, or I see them on farmland or in the woods or anything like that. And so one of the challenges is that because people don't see homelessness in the same way in a rural setting, there is an assumption that it's not present. And as a result of that, services get developed into urban areas. So one of the challenges, one of the reasons we've asked you to do this podcast, is because we wanted to raise the fact that actually, if anything, supporting homeless people in rural settings is more challenging. Because a good example, we did some research. If you look at a rough sleeper in an urban setting, the figures we've found is that they tend to walk about 10 miles a day. So going from place to place and perhaps going to appointments and so on. If you look at a rural setting, it can be as many as 15 miles a day, because all the different places they need to go are spread over a much wider area. In many rural towns, there is no DWP or job centre or whatever. They might have to go to...
And with the number of banks that are closing branches these days in more rural areas and expecting people to travel long distances to get to the branch of your bank is also going to become an increased problem, I think.
Yeah, and so we can relate all that. So basically what we see is in the rural areas, there might be fewer people, but to reach those individuals, to actually help them, there's much bigger gaps. You have to take them much further to get to services and so on. So it becomes a more challenging problem. So supporting a homeless person in a rural setting is more costly than supporting a homeless person in an urban centre, because it's much easier to get economies of scale and so on. You don't have those in the rural setting.
But then because the perception is that the problem is more in the cities, the funding goes to the cities rather than to the rural areas where the funding is needed more.
Yes, exactly. So it becomes a challenging and a self-fulfilling prophecy. Let me just give you some examples of when we've talked to some of our clients, where we found people. So we found one ex-soldier who would become homeless for particular reasons. He was living in a tree. He'd set up his own house in the top of a tree because that was where he felt safe. We often find that people in the fens areas make encampments on fields, and when one person sets up a tent, usually near some trees, somebody else will join them, and then another, and you can end up with encampments of 10, 20 people, where they actually set up their own little community. and so on. And so those things happen, but they'd be out of sight because on the whole, their experiences, if people see where they are, they're also very vulnerable. Because in a town, if somebody attacks you, there's usually other people around. There's lights on and so on.
The
in
CCTV and the high street and all that kind of thing.
Exactly. Whereas if you're in the countryside, you can be attacked and nobody might see you. Nobody might be aware. So the people in the countryside need to find specific places to go into. We've had to take people who have been living under, literally, they created shelters out of bits of old metal and plastic sheeting, and they've gone to skips and got old mattresses and put them on the ground. We know loads of people who've ended up in hospital because they're sleeping effectively out in the open and on damp surfaces. So all these things are going on. And I can guarantee you, if any of the listeners to this podcast have driven through a country area, whether that's the Lake District, whether that's County Durham, the Peak District, the West Country, down in Cornwall and around there, whether it's down in Kent, whether it's in East Anglia, whether it's in Wales or Scotland, everywhere you have driven, you will have driven past some homeless people. It's just that you are not aware of it because they don't want you to be aware of it. So people forget that. And when they walk through cities and see homeless people, they just acknowledge that as being the norm, and that's where they picture it. But you will have driven past, many homeless people, never even realizing that they're there. Okay, so we don't want people to forget that homelessness is very much found in rural settings, and actually those individuals need, if not at least the same as the services in cities, probably a lot more. And just on that, a good example. So in Cambridge, if we actually look at the number of homelessness organisations in Cambridge, we're talking about double figures. Okay, in Finland, Ferry Project is the primary homelessness service. There are 3 or 4 other housing organisations that will provide some support, but none of them do outreach. So here we have a town with a very high percentage of the population homeless, with one service, and in a city like Cambridge, you'll have 6, 7, 8 services trying to reach out into the same area. Loads of soup kitchens, people wanting to do bits and pieces. So it's the podcast really is just to raise the profile, not to say that people in urban settings don't need help, but just to say don't forget what's going on in the rural communities as well.
Yeah, thank you. Don't forget the rural homeless. That's a great message. And the final question we asked those people who we were chatting to last year was what they thought needed to be done to solve some of the problems around the issue of homelessness. And this is what they said.
I think that's a case of looking at the root cause. So that's providing people with jobs, training, skills, so that they can then get themselves out of the situation that they're in.
I think better connections across housing, education, health and social care.
I think probably a very clear housing strategy that's agreed by the government, especially a social housing strategy that has proper investment, and that we increase the supply of new homes because of the excessive demand that we face in this country. And that hopefully in turn would help the whole issue around homelessness.
We need to get to the root of the issues and be able to support people in the right way. It's not just about a house, it's about everything else that a person needs in their life. So
more affordable housing and making sure that there's statutory services and support for people to prevent homelessness in the first place.
Oh, some of them are so difficult, aren't they? Because if your relationship breaks down, there's not much anybody can do about that except to help you onto the ladder to try to get back up on your feet. That's a mixed sort of metaphor, but you know what I mean? Actually get somewhere where you can have a place of your own again and feel safe. And
we just need a better safety net. We need to recognise that people shouldn't drop below a certain level in our society, and we seem to have accepted that. So it's putting back the basics that you should be able to stay dry and fed and healthy.
Just having that support network for them, but not, in the sense of friends and family, because some people may not have that. Just having a safe space for them to go to and being aware of that they can go to that place. Support from other, companies, charities, all come together. It's not just a one-man band thing. It needs to be a collective of everybody, really.
Well, the system that is in place at the moment is completely flawed. There needs to be, in my opinion, a complete rethink towards preventing homelessness and tackling homelessness. However, I think it is easier to tackle than to prevent because there are so many factors that come into play for someone to end up being homeless. I firmly believe that the government needs to form a new type of task force with facilities to have outreach capabilities to locate and search and have conversations with the homeless and offer them immediate help. For this to happen, they will also need to have in place lots of temporary supported accommodations across the country with, access to health professionals, administration to help with their recovery from being homeless, and any other issues such as poor physical health, mental health, addiction, help with, maybe they have a lack of benefits and need help there. And I know the blueprint for this, works because Ferry Project have this all-encompassing support, but it's something that needs to, happen the whole country. We need to have these facilities all over the country just to support the homeless, because we don't have that right now. Homeless people are just sort of sent to a bed and breakfast, temporarily, and then they're back homeless again, and no one is really tackling the long-term problems for homelessness. It's just a very short-term fix, which is costing so much money. Short-term fix never work. There needs to be a long-term fix here so we can almost eradicate it,
So lots of talk there about affordable housing. Is that the magic bullet, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, there's a lot more to it than that. Affordable housing. So obviously there is a housing shortage, and so more houses are needed. Can I just say that, again, if you think about it, where are houses built? Houses are built in urban centres. They're not particularly built in rural centres. And indeed, people resist houses being built in centres. So we have a rather strange situation where, we have homeless people in rural settings, and yet other people are resisting having a new house built for them in those settings. And indeed, many will say, don't come spoiling our village. Well, actually, for the person who's sleeping rough in the field in your village, it's not spoiling the village at all. It's actually providing a basic requirement. So there is a balancing act here, and it's not a simple answer. But some homes, obviously, support homes are needed. However, everybody who is homeless, without being too brutal, is homeless for a reason. Something has happened that has led to their homelessness. And so therefore they need some support to both come to terms with what happened and actually develop skills so the thing isn't repeated over and over again. And again, research is quite clear. The most common cause of homelessness is actually breakdown in family, breakdown in relationships. So that could be matrimonial, it could be parent-child, it could be the death of a partner or a spouse or a close, intimate person. All these things lead to severe trauma for the individual. And it's how the individual reacts to that trauma and how they try and resolve the trauma in their lives that causes much of the problem. So it isn't just about housing. It is about the fact that people have gone through some terrible events, and as a result of those terrible events, whatever reason, are alone. And we need to provide them with support on that. So that might be mental health support. It might be support, as you say, developing skills. It might be support rebuilding relationships back. It might be with debt management. It could be about drug and alcohol addictions. It could be that they've gone to prison, they're coming out to prison, and they've been rejected by their family now. And some people might say, well, rightly so, but those individuals have got to live somewhere. So we need to rebuild them. We need to build them back up so that they can make a positive contribution to society rather than a negative one or be a drain on society. And that's what we're trying to do. Nobody, when they were a child, when they were asked, what do you want to do when you grow up, said, I want to be a homeless person. So that's not been ever anybody's ambition. So what we want to do is provide them with the support and ability and the opportunities to become the person they wanted to become. And if we can do that, then hopefully we can support them on that journey. They can get going. And So some of our clients, if we want to just share a few success stories, some of our clients now have got some very high-powered jobs. Some of them live on the continent, some of them in all sorts of positions. I was a school teacher before I got involved in homelessness, so I know about education. The most intelligent person I've ever met was homeless. He could talk to me about scientific theories and all sorts of stuff. He taught me a lot of science stuff. So we mustn't just assume that because somebody's homeless now, that is their destiny and that is their situation. Actually, they could go on to incredibly great things. They just need the opportunity and the chance to start again. And that might take a while to help them on that journey. So it's a lot more than housing. We made that mistake at the beginning. Ferry Project at the beginning, we just thought if we provided housing, that'd be enough. It took less than a year for us to learn that was just not the case. There's a lot more to helping people than just giving them a house.
And there's a lot that the Ferry Project does offer. If you are interested in finding out all the different services that Ferry Project offers their clients, as well as the wider community, do go and visit the website ferryproject.org.uk, and you'll find out all sorts of interesting things there. Thank you, Keith Smith, for joining us today on the Rural Homelessness Podcast. It's been fascinating. And thank you also to everybody who participated answering our questions as we went around the region a little while ago. So thank you to everyone for your thoughts and your contributions as well. Well, thank you, Keith. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. And it's good to see you, Matt, again. I'm glad to be able to contribute in this way.
And thank you as well for listening to this episode of the Rural Homelessness Podcast. We come out on the 1st and the 15th of every month, so do join us again soon for another episode of the Rural Homelessness Podcast. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Rural Homelessness Podcast, brought to you by the Ferry Project. Visit our website on www.ferryproject.org.